All right. So, as I said, welcome back. So, today we're going to finish up our discussion of King Lear. Lauren, I know you wasn't here the other day, but I do now have the video from our class session the other day posted. So, you can go back and catch up on that. Today we have the culmination of all of this. We have finished. This is actually Shakespeare's longest tragedy. So you guys will have now finished his longest of his plays. Of course, the other day we pretty much introduced ourselves to a lot of the major themes of the play, right? From social class, especially the nature of power, right? What gives a king power? What gives an aristocrat power? And we talked about Edmund. Should we feel sympathy for Edmund or not? And we also talked a lot about the fool, character of the fool in the play. So today, of course, we kind of see where it all went, right? As we see things end up turning out pretty badly for almost everyone, except Edgar. Edgar comes out of it pretty good, right? But pretty much everyone else dies in some way, shape, or fashion, to quote our governor. So, way, shape, form, or fashion, I should say. So, I just kind of want to turn the floor over to you guys. What was your reading experience finishing this play, especially after our discussion the other day? Were you guys surprised at how certain plot threads ended up before we dive into specifics? Did the reading experience go a little smoother even? I know that Kelly said the other day he was mostly listening to it. Lauren, I'd be curious to even know what your reading experience was like with the play.
I really like this one. I don't know that I like reading Shakespeare. I really like this play.
What about this play especially stuck out to you?
I like the way at the beginning of it how he's trying to divide everything up, but then his two oldest daughters are plotting against him and he's siding with them instead of the daughter that truly loves him.
Right. Yeah, Reagan and Goneril, right? You missed their discussion the other day, Lauren, but I actually said Goneril was actually a pun. Think about the STD, it starts with the letter GON, right? Right. So that was Shakespeare having some fun with that name. But yeah, so yeah, we talked a lot the other day about especially that scene and the division of power that he does, how he pretty much gives away his whole claim to the throne. So he's pretty much just a king in name only after that first scene. If you're just a king in name only, right, you don't really have a lot of weight there. Good, yeah. I have a sense, Lauren, that this might be you getting more used to Shakespeare too, right? This is now, I know, the second play you've read with me, so maybe you're just getting more used to them, right? So sometimes students are shy to warm up to Shakespeare, but once you start to get into it, right, then students tend, once they get past that first hurdle, I guess that's often students will usually get into it pretty good.
Out of all the plays that I've read of his, I just think it's strange that he kills off almost everybody except for a couple of people. It's like he only leaves a couple to tell the story.
Right. Yeah. And Hamlet, pretty much everybody died at the end of that one too. Right. Except Horatio. Horatio was pretty much the only person left at the end of that one. Edgar and Kent both live at the end of this. Kent lives too. So at least there's that, right? Kent also lives for us. Yeah, how did for the other three of you here, how did the play turn out for you guys? Were you expecting it to go where it did? Of course, we learned that Lear dies of a broken heart at the end, right? That's actually what kills him, is a broken heart at the death of Cordelia. But
I was not expecting Cordelia to die. I really expected her to come out on top at the end. That one shocked me.
I felt like it was going to cost everybody by the actions of the two sisters fighting how they were. Two sisters fighting like that, there's always a bad outcome.
right. And they not only started fighting over the land, right, but they also started fighting over Edmund, right? So Edmund gets into the scheme here and seduces them both. So not only are they fighting for power, but they're also fighting for a man, right? So that's double trouble there. There, Kelly. Conflict between sisters.
Never good. Never good.
Brooklyn, Brad, what did you guys think of the conclusion here?
It wouldn't be Shakespeare if everybody didn't die at the end for mysterious causes.
Right.
I don't think I've read a tragedy where like no more than two people survive.
Yeah, there's always a bloodbath, right? We kind of have to ask ourselves, what, if anything, was solved with this conclusion? Like, does anything get fixed at all with the kingdom, especially? That's something that we should probably ask ourselves a little bit here. But before we do that, Brooklyn, what did you make of the end?
But like I said, I really wish Cordelia would have lived. But other than that, I like how both the sisters basically killed each other. That was a good like little twist. But yeah, everybody died. I wasn't expecting basically everybody to die.
Yeah, Cordelia is kind of painted as this almost angelic like presence in the play, right? So when she comes in, you kind of expect her to maybe take over the reins, maybe get the kingdom back on track again. But as we find out, that doesn't happen. It's also significant that she marries the King of France, right? So Cordelia actually comes in with the French to liberate the English, right, at the end of the play, which is kind of which is pretty interesting, especially as nationalistic as the English were at this time period after defeating the Armada and all of that stuff. What did you guys make of Edmund's schemes? Right, some of you we were kind of sympathizing with him a little bit the other day. How did you guys feel about Edmund the further the play went? Did you still keep sympathizing with him, or was there a sort of a moment of no return that he might have done, like blinding his own father, for instance, right? Poking his own father's eyes out. Right.
I feel like he deserved it.
You feel like Gloucester deserved the eye removal?
Yes.
Right. It's pretty horrific scene, right? They literally pluck his eyeballs out of his head. Right? There's no, even like when this thing is staged, right? There's no sort of non-graphic way to do it. Very, very much a violent, bloody scene there. But as we talked about, or go ahead, Brooklyn.
I feel like even if he deserved it, to be able to do that to your own father, like I couldn't do that to my dad. I don't think there's anything he could do to make me want to do that. You have to be pretty evil and pretty unfixable to do that.
Right. Yeah, we get a lot of discourse here about the treatment of parents, right? So not only Goneril and Regan's treatment of Lear, but also, of course, Edmund and Edgar's treatment of Gloucester. Did you guys get what happened to Gloucester? Did you guys kind of put two and two together what happened to him after he was put blind? Shakespeare kind of he kind of like throws the fact in there randomly, but it's insinuated that Gloucester does commit suicide after he's put blind. And there's the really macabre scene where Edgar comes up on him. Of course, Edgar's pretending to be poor Tom. But Edgar comes up on him and like he leads him to the edge of to what he thinks is the edge of the cliff. Right? He's like, jump. And then like Gloucester jumps, but then he just falls in the dirt, right? Because it's not really the edge of the cliff. So Edgar kind of that's kind of some really dark humor there almost, right? About the fact that that Gloucester's almost ready to off himself, and and Edgar takes his dad to where he kind of does it, but then kind of falls on his face comically. It's very messed up humor there, right? But what did you guys make of that scene, especially? I think it's in Act 4 when.
Is it bad if I laughed?
No, I don't think so. I think Shakespeare meant us to laugh. Right?
Because I thought it was funny. It reminds you ever seen those videos of like when people blindfold their friends and they take them like bungee jumping or something, and it's like 2 feet off the ground? That's what it reminded me of.
This sounds like videos that I need to watch. Right, so it sounds like my kind of content. So. Yeah, I think you're meant to laugh there. Of course, anytime you laugh at something like that, maybe you feel guilty about it after, right? Like, should I have really laughed at that? Right, but that was kind of funny at the same time. Kind of just goes to show you this play is very nihilistic, right? This is very much a nihilistic sort of play. Of course, the word nihilism means that you believe in nothing. So you don't believe in God. You don't really believe in laws of the land or whatever, right? You literally believe in nothing. Like you believe the nothing is kind of like your guys' black screens here, right? Where you got your camera turned off, right? Life is bleak. Life is empty. Life is meaningless. Life is just a joke that we all have to go through in this thing we call existence. Right? So anytime you deal with nihilism, there's always a little bit of humor there, right? Because in a way, the philosophy sounds a little whiny, perhaps, but there's always a bit of humor to nihilism. This is a worldview that was popular at this time, but it's also become a worldview that's came back into our modern world, right? After the horrors that we saw in like World War I and World War II, the violence that came from those horrors, right? A lot of writers, like who are fairly recent writers, right, from the past 100 years or so, a lot of writers like that have taken these sort of nihilist themes again. But it is this completely like bleak worldview. Life's a joke. Laugh at it, right? So,
You ever read naturalist stories?
yep, yeah, stuff like Jack London and Stephen Crane.
My favorite one is a short story. It's called To Build a Fire.
Mhm. Yeah, Jack London's great story there about the guy, man. That's the man versus nature story, right? Where the guy is out, the nature's out to kill him, right? He's out in the cold and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, the 1890s was when that thing was written. The 1890s is definitely had a lot of like nihilist tendencies to it. So nature's out to get you, capitalism's out to get you. There was a lot of those sorts of themes in that time period as well. That's actually my favorite time period to teach when it comes to lit. I love the late 1800s, early 1900s. That's such an interesting time period. But do you guys know anything about philosophy? In the early 20th century, there was a philosophy that came out as a result. It's a response to nihilism called existentialism. You guys might have heard that. Have any of you guys, Brad, I'm sure you've heard that term before, existentialism, right?
No, I haven't actually heard that one before.
Have you guys heard of existentialism? Yeah, so existentialism is pretty much this philosophy, like it accepts nihilism, right? That, well, if life is in fact meaningless, right? Life still has dignity and purpose, right? So even if the universe is completely uncaring, let's say that there isn't, let's say that you believe, if you're a nihilist, you don't believe in God, right? So let's say you don't believe in God, you believe the universe is uncaring, it doesn't really, you're just a dot, a blip in the larger universe. There is the philosophy of existentialism takes that, but says, okay, even if life is this way, you still have to preserve some dignity. Like there's a certain beauty in persevering throughout life, even if life doesn't care and the end is out to get you. So there was lots of writers in the early 20th century, writers like John Paul Sartre, Edward Camus, I think is one. That this was a whole big philosophical movement that started in the 20th century as a response to nihilism. I raised that because King Lear's character in a way seems slightly existential, right? Lear, after being stripped of all of his power, starts to see the world for what it really is, and which is this sort of, I'm not purporting the philosophy of nihilism here, but Lear kind of accepts the world as being this like nihilistic place, and he kind of part of his character is the dignity with which he deals with that. Let's turn to a certain scene here. This is one of the most famous scenes in the play. That is Act 3, Scene 2. Act 3, Scene 2. I'll kind of show you this existentialism idea at work here. So at this moment, at the very beginning of this act, Lear has gone from being a king to being completely homeless. Right? From a king to being completely homeless. Goneril and Regan both kick him out because he's causing too much problems. Right? You could kind of relate with Goneril and Regan here a little bit, right? You got this rowdy old man and all his knights like getting drunk all the time and causing a bunch of ruckus. Right? In a way, you could kind of sympathize with them there, right? Sure, he's their dad, right? But he's causing a lot of headaches. So they're like, go deal with your problems, Dad. Right? Go figure it out. But of course, he calls them ungrateful and all this stuff. But he's left out in the wilderness by himself in this storm. And we get the way that this is sort of enacted. The storm is huge, right? It's almost like a hurricane. So Lear kind of strips down almost naked here at the beginning of this scene, and kind of like shouts at nature here. If we read, I'll read the speech that he gives. He says, blow, winds, and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow. Cataracts and hurricanes spout till you have drenched their steeples, drown the cocks. You sulphurous and thought-executing fires, vaunt couriers of oak-cleaving thunderbolts, singe my white head. And thou, all-shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of the world. Crack nature's molds, all Germans spill at once that make ingrateful man. So that is, this scene where he's kind of like going out in the nature, kind of like screaming at nature, right? Kind of almost defying the universe in a way, right? It's almost like this old man shaking his fist at the world. Right, that's oftentimes been seen as this sort of existentialist moment, right, where Lear is showing his humanity, the dignity of existence, right, in spite of an uncaring universe. So, did you guys feel sorry for Lear here? The fact that he goes from being a king to being homeless.
Kind of, but at the same time, he did it to himself, and he kind of got what he deserved. So
how do you think he did it to himself, Brooklyn? Just turning his back on Cordelia the way that he did, or the way that he acted when he went to Regan and Goneril's house?
yeah, just the way he turned his back on Cordelia and chose his other two daughters. I mean, she was honest with him and he banished her, and then the two bad daughters that he chose to rule turned their backs on him.
Right, yeah, it's hard to argue that he doesn't dig his own grave here, right? Like I've always felt slightly sympathetic to Regan and Goneril, right? Just because they don't want to deal with his nonsense. But at the same time, maybe they could have dealt with it a little more smoothly, right? You know, he was their father after all. How much crap should they take from him? I guess is the question to ask there. What do the rest of you guys think? Did you feel bad for Lear here? Maybe, or if you did you feel like he showed some dignity in his suffering? Do you guys think that there is a dignity in suffering? That might be another question, right? Like think about like, let's say a person gets cancer, right? They know they're going to die. Do you think that there's a certain dignity perhaps in persevering through those last days and suffering through it and keeping not letting it get to you even? It's kind of a similar thing here. Is there dignity in suffering and maybe persevering through suffering?
Yeah, I'd say so.
How so, Brad?
I mean, like, you've got the self-preservation to put up with whatever is ailing you, then I guess you kind of fought for it. But no, I didn't feel bad for him, like what happened to him.
You kind of echo Brooklyn there, like just turning his back on Cordelia the way that he did.
Yeah.
Right.
The other two were kind of like overly flirtatious with their when King Lear asked him, "How much do you love me?" And I don't know, I kind of agreed with Cordelia's response more than I did the other two.
Yeah, the other two are just kissing his butt, right? Whereas with Cordelia, she pretty much just says, "I love you like a daughter loves her father." Right. I'm not going to blow it up out of proportion, right? That's a great love between a daughter and father. But she pretty much says, "I'm not going to exaggerate it." So going back to that question, what do the rest of you guys think? Do you guys kind of agree with this existential idea, right? That there's dignity in suffering?
I'm kind of torn because I feel like he should have just put his pride aside when he was out in that storm and just been like, "Hey, I'm sorry. I'll comply to what you want. Just let me come back in." It would have been so much more simple. I feel like he was just an angry old man who wanted to get his way and be right. But at the same time, if I was in that situation and I was the one that dug my own grave, I would probably have a hard time swallowing my pride and knocking on the door too.
Right. We men are prideful creatures, right? We don't like to admit when we're wrong. So better
was
to be
also,
homeless than admit we're wrong, right?
There was also a king before, so maybe it was that what I say goes royal, like entitlement kind of thing.
Yeah, he doesn't understand the fact that he doesn't have this power anymore. Right? Once he gives that land up, that's it. He has no more say than you or I do. So I guess it's the Renaissance equivalent of getting retired. It's almost like he's getting retired to a nursing home, right? And he still thinks that he has power, right? But he really doesn't. This has always been a big deal in our Western culture, right? How do we treat our elderly, right? Especially when they're getting ready to retire. If you compare us to a country like Japan, right? Japan treats their elderly with a lot more reverence and respect, right? In many ways than we do in the West. So, we see here in this play, like there's not much reverence for him at all, right? He is just thrown out to the wolves. But we see this problem even today in the West, right? I mean, if you see old people all the time, like get thrown in like nursing homes, left to rot, right, until they die, pretty much. It's a bit of a sad situation. But the play is definitely calling all this into question. Like, what happens when we get old? How do we treat the elderly? I don't know where I'm going with this as far as asking you guys a question, but would you guys? Do you guys think you guys are kind of agree with what I said there? Do you think that we don't treat our elderly well in even their modern culture, or do you think that they still have some perks for being old, right?
I mean, I think there are certain situations where elderly people aren't treated with the respect that they should. I feel like when you get older, people respect you less and just see you as, I don't know, they start treating you like you're a little kid again. But at the same time, being old can't be that terrible, The older you get, the more people wait on you hand and foot, so.
Yeah, you raised a good point there, Brooklyn, about how old elderly people were sometimes treated like they're infants. Right? They, in a way, that can be seen depending on your perspective. I guess you could probably see that as a good thing or a negative thing, right? Depending on your perspective. Lear at the end of this play kind of becomes a child again. Right after this storm scene, something seems to break in his brain, right, where he becomes almost childlike again. So I'm glad you brought that up, because this certainly happens in the play, right, where he becomes very much childlike again. He seems incapable of taking care of himself by the time we get to the end of this.
Lear actually reminds me in the end of this, has anybody watched Disenchantment?
I've seen bits and pieces of it. I haven't gotten into it, but I've seen bits and pieces of it.
He reminds me of the king from Disenchantment as he gets like crazier and crazier. It's so funny. You should watch it. It'll remind you exactly of Lear.
I've watched like the first season, so I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty funny show from what I've seen. I've been sitting in a room while my father-in-law watches it. My father-in-law likes it a lot. It does seem like a pretty funny little show.
It's hilarious. Every episode is crazy.
One thing that I want to mention here a little bit is Lear being in the storm does seem to learn some sort of lesson or moral from being homeless. Where's that? I'm trying to find that line. He has a line really close after that storm scene. I'm trying to find where it is in my book. I have the fancy schmancy King Lear edition, right? That's if you guys take a look at the camera here, right? This is only like a few lines. It's like a 400-page long version of King Lear that extensively goes over every word and what it means and all this stuff. Right? Like, but yeah, the textbook that you guys get is a lot simpler than this one. But he has a line shortly after that storm scene where he's like, I've taken too little care of this. Right? It's still raining on him. But it seems like he's even kind of reflecting on his rule. Right? He says, I've taken too little care of this. Right? He say whenever he's talking to poor Tom, who Edgar, of course, is dressing up as poor Tom, the homeless guy. But Lear even kind of has a moment of reflection, like, oh, maybe I should have taken better care of this problem of homelessness and things like that. So it's hard to argue that that's still not a problem that we deal with in our society. Right? We get plenty of people who get thrown out in the streets, become homeless. So there's almost like a political message here. Right? It takes Lear being thrown out to the wolves, so to speak, for him to understand that. But it takes him coming down to the lowest of the low, hanging out with poor Tom, right before he understands it. Hey, maybe there could have been some more done, especially to help the poor. So, and Lear seems to have grown a little bit from his experience here. He becomes more selfless. Did you guys? Of course, I'm throwing out a popular opinion here, but do you guys feel like Lear growed from this experience and maybe saw the errors of his ways? You could probably make the case either way.
I
I
mean, he
hope
didn't
to
see
say he
them.
did, because I mean, hopefully after seeing how his first wrong choice when he got rid of Cordelia and chose the other two daughters, and then everything that followed, how could you not realize the big mistake that you made?
Right? Oh, that daughter really loved me after all. Right? Unlike these two. What was you going to say a second ago, Brad?
I just made a joke. I said that he didn't see them.
that was a pretty good one. Right? All of our themes of blindness in the play. So yeah, I mean, this is all raises some good points. There's a few nasty sides to Lear's character the further we go through this play too. He seems to internalize a lot of his issues with his daughters, in who this play is very misogynistic in many ways, right? The Renaissance as a time period was pretty misogynistic. I think you guys probably get that a little bit here with this play. There's a famous passage where Lear is blaming all women for his daughters being as they are. And that's Act 4, Scene 6. This is a passage I want to take a look at with you guys. Act 4, Scene 6. Let me see what page it is on their book. 1425, page 1425 in the book, because I had the longer edition. And it's Act 4, Scene 6, roughly around line 100. Roughly about line 100. But yeah, I'll read this passage for you. But Lear seems to, as I say, blame all women for his problems. He said, so looking at the passage above that, he says, "Ha, Goneril with a white beard. They flattered me like a dog and told me I had white hairs in my beard ere the black ones were there. To say aye and no to everything that I said aye and no to was no good to any. When the rain came to wet me once and the wind to make me chatter, when the thunder would not peace at my bidding, there I found them, there I smelled them out. Go to, they are not men of their words. They told me I was everything. 'Tis a lie, I am not Aggie-proof." Gloucester says, "The trick of that voice I do well remember. Is it not the key? Ah, every inch a key. When I do stare, see how the subject quakes. I pardon that man's life. What was that cause? Adultery? Thou shalt not die. Die for adultery? No. The wren goes to it, and the small gilded fly does lecture in my sight. Let copulation thrive, for Gloucester's bastard son was kinder to his father than my daughters got between the lawful sheets. To it, luxury, pell mell, for I lack soldiers. Behold yon simpering dame, his face between her forks precious as snow, that minces virtue and does shake the head to hear pleasure's name. The fit you, not the soiled horse, goes to it with a more riotous appetite. Down from the waist, their centaurs, though women all above. To the girdle do the gods inherit, beneath is all the fiends. There's hell, there's darkness, there's the sulphurous pit. Burning, scalding, stench, consumption. Fie, fie, fie. Shh, shh. Give me an ounce of civet, good apothecary. Sweeten my imaginations. There's money for these. So pretty hateful little speech he gives there, right? But he's pretty much like, let copulation thrive. Like women are like centaurs, right? They're a woman up above the waist, below the waist. They're like a horse. It's definitely a bit of a misogynist passage here. This one's often cited. There's another one earlier in the play where I forget whether it was Goneril or Reagan, but after one of them kick him out of the kingdom, he pretty much like curses her womb. All right, he's like, "I curse your womb where you'll never have children." All right. You guys probably remember that passage pretty early on. It was before the storm scene. But Lear does seem to internalize his problems with his daughters to all women here. I'm especially curious to hear especially Lauren, Kelly, and Brooklyn. I'm especially curious to hear what you guys have to say about some of Lear's outbursts here. But what did you all make of them? Was this just a rambling old man? Did you not pay him too much mind? Or were you like, whoa, that's pretty intense there, dude?
I feel like he's as evil as his two daughters.
How so, Kelly?
They definitely got it from him.
Cause like when I picture like a father getting mad at his daughters, like usually they wouldn't say that type of stuff, but his daughters are the same as him, and they when they're mad, like their evil just comes out of nowhere and they do the worst things. And when he gets mad, he says the worst things about them. Like I feel like he's as crazy as they are, and Cordelia's the only normal one.
What did you say a second ago, Brooklyn?
I was just agreeing with her. They definitely got it from him.
Right. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to argue with you there, Kelly. Um, he goes from 1 to 100 pretty quick there, right? With his anger, like who after a slight argument with our daughter is like, I curse your womb to where you'll never have kids, right? Who does that, right? So he's definitely quick to anger, to say the least.
I feel like all three of them get blinded by their anger and then they just do stupid things. Like he regretted making the choice, but then he just goes crazy and that didn't fix anything.
What do you think he should have done there, Kelly? You think he should have just listened to Reagan and Goneril and disbanded his knights and all that stuff?
Um, I don't really know. Uh, but I feel like every time he does get mad and he starts his anger attitudes, it just makes it worse. And I feel like they feed from his anger and it just makes them do more bad things too. They just keep going at it. There's no like they never fix anything.
Right? Yeah, maybe they're a result of his parenting. Right? I think that's a good point. If he's always been this quick to anger and whatnot, maybe he hasn't been such a good parent, right? Maybe Lear created these monsters.
Isn't there like a quote that's like evil begets evil or something like that?
Yeah, there's one somewhere in here about that.
Yeah, I feel like they were raised with anger at all times. And anytime you're raised with seeing that all the time and you hear it, and I don't know, I felt like he taught them to be how they are, but somehow Cordelia's just normal.
She's that one good seed that comes out, right? Just despite the parents being crazy.
Weren't the witch trials still a thing when this was written?
So there was a lot of discussion about witches and stuff. The witch trials in America weren't until the late 1600s. So that was many. The one in America that took place in Salem was like 80 or 90 years after this play. But yeah, there was lots of discussion about witches and stuff at this time period, as
The
evidenced by
trials in Europe were like early 1600s, like 1590 to 1601. So they did
yeah,
it first, and then it happened in Salem afterwards.
yeah, you're right. There was a bunch in Europe around this time. Hence the fact we have Macbeth, right? We've got the three witches as the antagonists in Macbeth. There was lots of superstition about it that started springing up around this time. A lot of that came straight out of the Protestant Reformation. It was mostly Protestants who started seeing a lot of issues with the devil and seeing supernatural things with witches and stuff like that.
She knows math. She's scary.
Who's scary?
It was just a joke.
Oh, what'd you say? I didn't catch it.
I said she knows math. She's scary. Burn her.
Yeah, she's showing a little bit of she has a brain of her own, right? Burn her at the stake. Now we're going to watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail later in my film class. Right, there's a joke about burning the witches and in that movie. That's pretty funny. If you guys want to watch a funny movie, watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail, especially after all the stuff we've been covering. Right?
That movie is a gem.
It's very good.
Just put a scratch.
Now the holy hand grenade has always been my favorite. Has always been my favorite part.
It's really long too. That movie's like 2 hours, 30 minutes, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I always appreciate the guy going around with a wheelbarrow, throwing the dead bodies on it from the plague. That's always pretty funny too. Yeah, I guess you could probably say here that Lear does learn the error of his ways. He does. It is pretty heartwarming when he reunites with Cordelia. And it's always, every time I've seen this staged, it's always very tragic in the end when Cordelia dies in his arms, and then he dies too, right? That if this play is played right, that's always a hard moment to watch. This one has always bothered me more than like some of the rest of you guys read Hamlet in here, right? This play has always struck a nerve with me more than Hamlet, because Hamlet was all about revenge, right? He got his revenge, but there's just some very deeply disturbing themes in this one that have always sort of struck the bell. It's always sort of rang a bell with me more than some of his other tragedies. Most people either say this one or Hamlet is his best. So I've always leaned more towards this one. But there's a bunch of people in the Hamlet camp. Then, of course, the question at the end that we have is that was anything solved by this whole conflict? Edgar becomes king at the end, right? After all this, Edgar becomes king. It looks like he and Ken are getting ready to rebuild the kingdom at the end. Maybe there, right? You know, Edgar seems to have learned his lessons from being out as poor Tom through the whole book. He seems to maybe have learned some lessons in charity and things like that. So maybe he'll be a good king after. But even the fact that they're still continuing on with kings, right, knowing that the system doesn't work, right, you could maybe raise an objection there saying, oh, did we learn anything? We're just going back to having a king again. Right. So it depends how it's often played. You can read this and yeah, Edgar's probably going to do good, or Edgar's just going to continue the same cycle over and over and over. What did all you guys think about Edgar becoming king at the end? Did you read that as hopeful, or here we go again?
I kind of imagine Edgar in like 30 years after that being in the same position that his father was in, making the same mistakes and doing the same thing.
Right? Yeah, maybe he would give away his land or something like that, right? Maybe the same cycle would repeat. Whether about the rest of y'all, you see it as hopeful or here we go again, like as Brooklyn just said.
Hopefully it wouldn't happen again from being like experiencing the craziness of that family. Like you would know what to stay away from, like making the wrong choices.
Right? Yeah, it's
Edgar does have a lot of baggage though. So that's like one of those things you have to think about.
so maybe he'll learn from all that. Won't continue the same mistakes.
Or maybe it makes it worse.
Yeah, it's definitely left up for our interpretation. I've seen lots of different film adaptations of this, and the way that the different films play it off is always interesting. The Soviet Union actually made a Soviet Union version of King Lear that's like super dark and depressing. But whenever Edgar is rebuilding the kingdom at the end, that version kind of puts it off like a, oh no, here we go again kind of vibe. And if you guys are into history, that's a really interesting version because they made that version right after the death of Stalin. So the King Lear that they made is actually sort of a way of reflecting back on Stalin's dictatorship. But yeah, again, it depends on what version you're watching. There's all kinds of really good film versions of this. There's the Soviet Union one. Hirasawa made a Japanese samurai movie with King Lear's plot called Ran, R-A-N, Ran. I would recommend that one if you guys like this, like old. Maybe you haven't seen any of them, but these old black and white, very heavy stylized samurai movies that were made in Japan in the 50s and 60s. I think that's actually one of
films.
What'd you say, Brad?
I said the Hirasawa films. I've seen a few of them.
Yeah, I really enjoy Hirasawa. Seven Samurai is one that I like a lot. Yeah, I think Ran might be one of his only movies that's in color. So it's kind of interesting to see like this type of story take place in feudal Japan. There's also lots of just straight up adaptations of it too. I think there's a version I haven't watched yet on Amazon Prime that's got Sir Anthony Hopkins playing Lear. That's always been a version that I've wanted to watch. I haven't yet though. Tons of film versions of this. I would encourage you guys to do that. Of course, it's not a requirement, but I would encourage you guys to, over the next couple of weeks, watch a film version of all these different ones we're doing. Watch a Lear, watch an Othello, watch a Twelfth Night. you can kind of see how it's staged. Different, lots of times different directors will make different decisions. And about like even like how a line is said, or maybe they'll cut out stuff that was in the original text. So every time a film version is made of one of these, it almost grows and becomes a completely different text, right? A lot of times depending on the director's vision. So in a way, these plays are always growing and always evolving with the times. Our
I
next
think
play
my
up.
favorite. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Brad.
My favorite Shakespearean play was Macbeth. Macbeth was definitely my favorite. His speech towards like the end of the play, to be or not to be, is very iconic to me.
That's Hamlet you're thinking about, Brad.
Oh, I've got them mixed up.
Yeah, to be or not to be, that is the question, right?
My bad. I've read a lot of them, so they're starting to blend together.
Right. Yeah, we were talking about nihilism earlier. There's a great quote at the end of Macbeth that sums up nihilism too. That's the phrase is, life is but a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Right. So that's a great quote from the end of Macbeth, but that's also a quote used to show this idea that life is meaningless and without purpose and all this stuff. Not to be a Debbie Downer with our content today, guys, but this was definitely they definitely had a bleak outlook on life during this time period. The tragedies do, at least. But if you guys read this and compare this to like a Greek tragedy, there's no comparison. Like these plays blow the old Greek tragedies out of the water. Something like Oedipus or Medea, right? So you can kind of tell how the Renaissance definitely innovated and changed drama for the better. Before this, we saw that with Everyman, right? But before this, you didn't really have these deeply psychological characters before people like Shakespeare and Marlowe, right? It was mostly just allegories and things like that. So we're getting into better and better stuff the further we go because we have these very deep characters. So very good then. So I saw that everybody has submitted their first short papers. I'll try to get those back to you in relatively short order. I'll probably get those back to you early next week. I've got a lot going on with going to work, and then I drive to Logan for play practice, and then I got to drive back to Beckley. So I'm on the road a lot right now. But sometime over the weekend, early next week, during the spring break week, I should return those to you.
Before paper, can you go over again how to write a title of a text into a paper again? I think I did that wrong or backward in mine.
What, just like how to title the essay, format it?
No, like if you were putting the title of what we were writing about in the paper, how would you do it? I think I did it backward in mine. Like instead of italicizing it, I put it in quotations.
Yeah, you would italicize it. Yeah, so let's say you were writing about Dr. Faustus, right? You would write Dr. Faustus in italics. The rule is if it's a longer work, you put it in italics. And if it's a shorter work, like let's say you're talking about the wife of Bath's Tale, right? If you were talking about the wife of Bath's Tale, you would put that in quotation marks because that's not the name of the whole book. That's just like a part of the book. But if you said the Canterbury Tales, then you would put that in italics. So chapters or parts of books, you put in quotes. If it's a book as a whole, we put it in italics. So you wrote about Canterbury Tales, didn't you, Lauren? So if you talked about a wife of Bath's, if you said like the wife of Bath's tale or something, you put that in quotes. So if you put that in quotes, you did it right.
I think in my first sentence, I put in the Canterbury Tales and then put that in italics. And then put wife of Bath in quotations. Or I did it backward. I can't remember.
If you did it the first way, you did it right. In a couple of weeks, we'll talk about sonnets too. Like whenever we talk about sonnets, those go in quotes because they're not longer works. So, yeah, that type of thing I'm never too nitpicky about. Like I'll mark it, but that's not something I put into my evaluation of the whole paper so much. So as I said, here in a week or two, right after spring break, Monday after spring break will be 21st. That day we'll read Othello, Acts 1 through 3, and Acts 4 and 5 on Wednesday. All right. I'm looking forward to that one. I've actually never taught Othello before, so that will be a first for me. So you guys have a good spring break. Relax, enjoy yourselves, clear your minds for the come back renewed at the end. It's always harder after spring break. You come back and then the weather suddenly gets nice. And you're just like, oh man, I'm not feeling this stuff right now, right? But we'll get through it. So you guys are doing good. Just for such a small class, I think we're having a pretty awesome class here for such a small group. So, all right, guys. So take care, and we'll see you guys on the other end.